Good evening, Deputy Premier, Acting Chief Justice, Leader of the Opposition, Your Honours, Your Grace, General, Professors, ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys. Limited to our grandchildren, I think. It is Kay's and my great privilege and pleasure to welcome you all to Fernburg this evening as we gather on the lands traditionally tended by the Turrbal and Yagara peoples, for whom I at once express great respect. Only 25 governors have preceded me since Sir George Bowen arrived in 1859. Sir George, by the way, was a true plenipotentiary. As a benevolent dictator, he alone effectively ordained the basis of our system of state government, the one we enjoy today. By the end of their terms, however, all 25 of those governors had extraordinary stories to tell. And it was usually at the end of their terms that they told them, necessarily in compressed form. This evening, there being the first anniversary of my being sworn in, provides an opportunity to speak early in the term about Kay's and my experience. There is much of interest, which may be said, even after only 1 year. After all, it is not every job which can encompass, in its first 12 months, seeking to support Queenslanders in adversity following natural disaster, discussing with Indigenous Queenslanders at Cherbourg, Bamaga and Thursday and York Islands the futures they want to create, speaking to tens of thousands of Queenslanders gathered for a dawn service on the centenary of Gallipoli, having a private audience with the Queen and deciding who, according to the people's will, governs Queensland. Now, I at once acknowledge the worthwhile role of the Government House website and the daily vice-regal notices in communicating what the Governor does. But in 2015, more frankly can be done to reach a broader audience more quickly. That is why I deliberately established a foothold in the Twitter sphere. That is why there is now an official and active Governor of Queensland Facebook page. This evening's address is in that same spirit. Kay and I are keen to share with the community our experiences in the vice-regal role sooner rather than later. And so the event is being, as they say, live streamed. I've shepherded these remarks into the 3 C's of a governor's role: constitutional, ceremonial and community. I begin by informing you, Chief Scout's honour, and I am Chief Scout in Queensland, that Ms Angelina Jolie will be making an appearance later in the course of this address. I regret to say that it is not in person. But the Deputy Premier will be pleased to hear that neither is there any fee involved. In advance of her pro bono appearance, I borrow the title of a film she directed, some of it shot in southeast Queensland. The film is Unbroken, and the word serves as the theme for my remarks under the constitutional section. I refer, of course, to the stresses placed on Queensland's constitutional arrangements following the state election of the 31st of January. The epithet is apt to describe the successful outcome of this test of our system. Despite the stresses and strains, it emerged from the test unbroken. The election outcome brought about an unusual state of affairs. First, neither major party secured a majority in its own right, the so-called hung parliament. Second, a sitting premier lost his seat, only the second time that had happened in Queensland. The first was in 1915. Third, the election result brought into the spotlight the workings of the constitutional mechanisms to resolve the situation and give Queensland a government. These don't normally sit at the top of Queenslanders' everyday concerns, nor are they usually prominent in the media, much less lead stories. Fourth, the situation created an early challenge for a governor who had been in the job for all of 6 months and whose lawyer's grasp of constitutional theory had become a tad rusty. At the time, I did wonder if it was mere coincidence that the Australian and New Zealand Chief Justices gave me, as a farewell gift, a copy of H.V. Evatt's book, The King and His Dominion Governors, or if the official secretary at Government House was acting on a premonition when he supplied me, well in advance of the swearing-in, with a comprehensive range of reading material on the constitutional role of a governor. All that said, the core document for this discussion is not a learned text, but it is the Constitution of Queensland Act 2001. I rely on section 29, subsection 1 of the Act. There must be a governor of Queensland. That clears up why I'm here tonight. But the Constitution was unhelpful in telling me what I should be considering over those 2 weeks between election and government. Our system relies heavily on custom and convention. There has long been an unwritten agreement within the political class that no matter how robustly party politics are played, certain constitutional processes and procedures will apply and be respected. Paradoxically, it is this outwardly fragile amalgam of written rules and unwritten convention which has given Queensland's system of government its essential stability for over 150 years. It did so again earlier this year. I was out of Queensland when on the 5th of January, the Premier proposed to the then acting governor the calling of the election for the 31st of that month. The election was called unexpectedly early during the usual vacation period. The principal issue which no doubt engaged the acting governor when issuing the writs was the assurance of supply during the ensuing period of caretaker government. At this general election, the governing party, the LNP, won 42 of the 89 seats in the Legislative Assembly, 3 seats short of a majority in its own right. The ALP won 44 seats out of 89, which was 1 short of a majority. 3 independents were elected. Negotiations between the major parties and the independents began. On the 5th of February, one of the independents, Mr Peter Wellington MP, now the Speaker, publicly pledged his support for the ALP on votes of confidence and supply, subject to certain caveats. The 2 Katter Party MPs did not formally declare support for either major party. Naturally, I was aware of these developments through conventional and social media, and I thank the media for discharging its role in informing us all about what is going on and why. However, I was kept directly informed through timely telephone discussions, starting as early as the morning after the election, and face-to-face meetings with the leaders of the 2 main parties and our respective officers. I met the then Premier, Campbell Newman, with then Attorney-General Jared Blay and Solicitor-General Peter Dunning at Premier Newman's request on the 5th of February. Premier Newman updated me on the distribution of seats, provided advice to the effect that caretaker government could continue, and assured me that ministers had been fulfilling and were prepared to continue to fulfil, as was he, for as long as was necessary, their obligations in that regard. At this stage, it was nearly a week since polling day, and an Electoral Commission of Queensland poll declaration, my office was advised, was likely to take at least another week. In the context of this close overall result, the close vote in a number of seats, the extended and further anticipated period of caretaker government, and the fact that the Premier had on election night conceded his seat, I considered it appropriate to offer the Leader of the Opposition, Ms Anastasia Palaszczuk, a similar opportunity to update me. Premier Newman called on me again on the 10th of February and tendered his resignation as Premier to take effect from the appointment of a successor Premier. He once again reassured me that caretaker government would continue for as long as necessary. At 11:54 a.m, I tweeted, which was, as it transpired, a most convenient and effective way of keeping the media and the wider public updated on the decision-making process. I tweeted my intention to commission a new Premier following the poll declaration. Later, on the 10th of February, Ms Palaszczuk took up my offer of the 6th of February and called to update me on the current situation. She indicated that she had secured the support of Mr Wellington and that she had obtained independent legal advice supporting her claim to form government should she be invited to do so. As I had indicated to Premier Newman earlier that day and subsequently tweeted, I informed Ms Palaszczuk that I would await the poll declaration before commissioning a new Premier. Well, the Electoral Commission declared the results on the 13th of February, which established the sound basis on which to make my decision. I accepted that Ms Palaszczuk had the support of Mr Wellington on matters of confidence and supply, which gave her a majority of 45 seats on the floor of the Parliament. This would continue to be the case when one of those 45 MPs was appointed Speaker, as the Speaker retains a casting vote. My primary constitutional obligation as Governor was to appoint as Premier the person who, at the declaration of the polls, would hold the confidence of the Legislative Assembly. This meant that I should commission Ms Palaszczuk as Premier. Also, on the 13th of February, I met at Government House with the new leader of the LNP, Mr Springborg, and shortly thereafter with Ms Palaszczuk. I invited Ms Palaszczuk to form government and to recall Parliament as soon as possible to demonstrate majority support. That support was demonstrated very early on the morning of the 27th of March, which was 2 days after I formally opened Queensland's 55th Parliament. Now, all these conversations were calm and respectful. Despite the high political stakes and the closeness of the result, the conventions were respected. Having over about 40 years endured countless courtroom brawls, as counsel and as judge, I had wondered how these meetings at the viceregal level would play out given the highly charged political atmosphere. I must say that I was greatly impressed by the measure and the courtesy of those with whom I met. The Electoral Commissioner completed the election process on the 15th of February, when he returned the writ inscribed with the handwritten names of all 89 elected members. Two other developments warrant mention. The first was the discovery that one of the candidates for the seat of Ferny Grove had not been eligible to stand for election. As a result of that unfortunate anomaly, the Electoral Commission flagged that it intended to refer the vote in Ferny Grove to the Court of Disputed Returns. Some commentators suggested that no government should be commissioned until the result in Ferny Grove was resolved, and that in the meantime the previous government should remain in place in caretaker mode. This brought into my mind just how long under Queensland's constitutional framework a Premier or Minister in these circumstances could maintain a commission without holding a seat in Parliament. As it transpired, it was unnecessary fully to test the limits of precedents in similar jurisdictions. This argument, awaiting a Ferny Grove resolution, depended for its force on a number of hypothetical events whose timescale and outcome were uncertain. My focus in any case was on constitutional principle, on which party could command a majority of votes on the floor of the Parliament. As it happened, the result in Ferny Grove was not referred to the Court of Disputed Returns. I was also aware, secondly, of calls for my decision to be made rapidly. I understood the genuine concern behind those comments and the potential impact of continuing uncertainty on the state. However, my role was to give the right, not rushed decision, a decision based on the facts on the ground and constitutional principle. In this case, achieving that goal demanded patience from me, but also from many others, from the candidates, from the people, from the journalists and their supporters who clung uncomplainingly to the fences of Fernberg over quite some days. I greatly admired their endurance at a warmish time of the year. The occasional lime cordial may not have gone astray, and we'll remember that for next time. The experience of those first 2 weeks in February, ladies and gentlemen, highlighted to me the importance of the role of the Governor as a non-political decision maker, applying constitutional principle in an independent manner. I know that a lot of people in the community shared that view. My tweet announcing that I would invite Ms Palaszczuk to form government was exposed to nearly 120,000 Twitter users. More than 42,000 people viewed the election posts on the Governor of Queensland Facebook page. One final observation, if I may, on matters constitutional. As now the nation's longest serving state governor, curious, isn't it? I am potential administrator of the Commonwealth, should the Governor-General be out of the country. I see this as a great honour for Queensland. It last happened in the term of the 21st Governor, Sir Walter Campbell, in the 1980s. I have already performed this role a few times. The first involved opening a water recycling plant in Serena. In fact, my first viceregal infrastructure opening. It was actually a sewerage reticulation plant, but very impressive at that. Now to matters ceremonial, perhaps a welcome change in direction. My ceremonial duties derive from my constitutional position as the representative in Queensland of our head of state, Her Majesty the Queen. I am frequently involved in events involving some degree of ceremony, from opening local agricultural shows to opening Parliament. I'm conscious at these times that Queenslanders are known for their reluctance to stand on ceremony. It is a part of the Queensland character, which is liked and even absorbed by visitors, including VIPs. I doubt there have been many G20 meetings like Brisbane's, where the German Chancellor, with minimal security, went on a mini pub crawl down Caxton Street. However, there are times when formality serves an important purpose. The best kind, I think, is aimed less at making those involved feel important themselves, but more at highlighting the significance of the event taking place. Formality of that kind invokes continuity, a sense of shared experience, and connects us with the past and, in a sense, with the future. The dawn service on Anzac Day this year was a prime example. This ceremony is now a highly valued way of commemorating our war dead. It involves military tradition, the mounting of the catafalque party and the playing of the last post, and other traditional elements, the minute's silence, the laying of wreaths, and the reciting of the Ode of Remembrance. It is a communal act of remembering, of respect, of pride, and of sadness. The repetition each year of the same ceremonial gestures links us with generations who experienced them before us. It encourages succeeding generations to continue observing the tradition. The ceremony on the 25th of April certainly concentrated this mind. When I moved to the podium at 4:21 a.m, those thousands of upturned faces, young and old, brought home to me, in the strongest terms, my responsibilities as Governor. I have subsequently regarded this as probably my most important public presentation so far. I strove through my address to meet community expectations, to capture those elements of respect, pride and sadness, of course, without being mawkish. I was immensely struck by the privilege of presuming to speak for us all on such an historic occasion. Consistently, meeting with the families of soldiers under deployment at Gallipoli Barracks a couple of months ago was, for me, a most humbling experience. Their sacrifice and that of their loved ones serving in our Defence Forces should always be widely acknowledged within the community and with profound gratitude. I again thank you, Major General Smith, for being with me that day, unexpectedly with me. You needn't have been with me, but you were, and I thank you for your enduring support and service. My involvement in military ceremony is not confined to Anzac Day. There is, for example, a tradition of presenting colours, standards and banners to military units, a tradition going back to the time of the Roman legions. It is important to our armed forces and it is carried out with solemnity. I was very proud to share in that long tradition in presenting colours to the 9th Battalion, the Royal Queensland Regiment, last year. Formality is also a feature of Government House ceremonies at which Queenslanders receive honours and awards under the Australian Honours System. There have been 13 of them so far in my term, honouring 265 individual recipients, including the recipients of bravery awards. Being invested with the highest honours your country can bestow is unequivocally a very special event. To go about that occasion without due ceremony would sell our marvellous Queensland recipients cruelly short. Government House puts enormous effort into making these days special. The recipients and their families appear most appreciative. The opening of a new Queensland Parliament is also an event conducted with substantial ceremony and ritual, and rightly so. The traditions were inherited from the Mother Parliament at Westminster. They symbolise, among other things, the primacy of an elected assembly over the monarch and his or her representatives. This is a principle at the heart of our democracy. We would take it for granted at our peril. To ensure the next generation understand these traditions, or in that direction, Kay and I were keen to ensure that students from Queensland schools attended the opening of Parliament. It was a great joy for us that students and teachers from the schools of my youth were able to be present. The enjoyment of the students was palpable, as it was when they so wonderfully lined the driveway on our first gubernatorial arrival at Fernberg 1 year ago. The private audience Kay and I were privileged to have with Her Majesty the Queen at Buckingham Palace last October straddles both the constitutional and the ceremonial. It is constitutional because I am Her Majesty's representative in Queensland. The Deputy Premier. It is ceremonial because, not surprisingly, such an event involves substantial protocol. On arrival at the palace, we were guided through a series of wonderfully impressive rooms by a succession of courteous and professional royal household staff, until ushered by an equerry into the waiting room outside the audience chamber, the 1844 room. Cue Angelina Jolie. Ms Jolie was granted the audience immediately preceding ours to be admitted as an honorary dame in the Order of the British Empire. We were in fact asked to arrive at Buckingham Palace an hour early to avoid the expected media crush. But the people were very excited to see us as we drove through. Now, her husband, you may also have heard of him, Brad, I believe, and their children were waiting nearby. That may have been a brush with show business royalty, and from what I've heard, the official secretary enjoyed a little more of that than I did. But it paled in significance when we met with the person from whom my authority as governor derives. Her Majesty was most engaging and gracious. She shared with us vivid memories of being in Queensland and in this very house. She gave me valued advice on the role of Governor of this state, whose vastness she emphasised. At that time, I had been in the role for all of 73 days. Her Majesty, we calculate, had been monarch for nearly 23,000 days. I listened attentively. And we left inspired and buoyed by Her Majesty's truly gracious expression of best wishes for our viceregal term. This audience is ceremonially described as the kissing of hands, though I may reveal that doesn't actually happen. I now move to the final of my 3 Cs. Inspiring is unequivocally the word to describe my community role as Governor. When sworn in, I pledged to support, encourage and inspire all Queenslanders and to seek to promote cohesion, goodwill and mutual respect within our communities. Of course, carrying out my constitutional duties with calm deliberation supports those aspirations. But the most direct way of achieving them is to engage with as many Queenslanders as is practicable face to face. And what a privilege that is. This is not a fair weather undertaking, by the way. Kay and I know we must be out in the community in tough times as well as good times. In March this year, we visited communities in central Queensland devastated by Cyclone Marcia. The resilience of the people we met was humbling. Though still shocked at the aftermath of the cyclone, they were determined to rebuild, repair and resume their lives as soon as possible. We saw at first hand the work of organisations whose planning and preparation minimised harm to life and limb. We met personnel from emergency services, the police service, local governments and organisations like Red Cross and the Salvos, bringing both practical assistance and compassion. We encountered an impromptu mud army at Thangool, neighbours, friends and strangers pitching in to help those worst affected, some of them from interstate. Thank you seems a woefully inadequate response. But our wonderful Queenslanders do have our wholehearted gratitude for their generosity and selfless service. Cyclones and floods tend to be short-lived violent events. By contrast, the drought in our state is a slow-burn natural disaster. It's been severely testing people's reserves of hope and strength for years. We've travelled through the worst-hit areas to reassure the families as best we can and the communities that they remain in the thoughts of all Queenslanders. And we gained the strong impression that our visits did lift spirits in the bush. It's one thing to read about the drought. It's entirely another to look across vast, bare, bone-dry landscapes under mocking blue skies. We have been deeply moved by the strength, resilience and mutual support shown by the worst affected communities. We've used the resources of Government House as best we can to support these Queenslanders in adversity, holding functions here for those affected by or involved in managing natural disasters. We have been delighted to have families from drought-affected areas and mayors from regions hit by Cyclone Marcia stay here as our guests at Government House. We have hosted many other specific purpose functions here, dinners as well as receptions, to highlight the contributions of Queenslanders over a wide variety of fields, including the professions, business and trade, education, science, the arts, not-for-profit organisations supporting admirable causes, and philanthropy. We have also been out and about in this enormous state, making 39 regional visits so far, from Gundawindi to the Torres Strait, Toowoomba to Boulia and west of Winton. It remains a challenge after 150 years to find places not already visited by previous governors. But I did manage one, Byfield State School northeast of Rockhampton, which stood squarely in the path of Cyclone Marcia. And what a great thrill it was to meet those children with trauma, for them, such a recent experience. Superbly turned out, and proud parents standing by them. The first time the Governor had ever been to Byfield State School, and they loved it. And so did I. Kay and I were deeply saddened to hear of the disastrous fire at the Winton Waltzing Matilda Centre. We had a wonderful time there and in Winton and Boulia regions more generally in April. We were hosted by generous, big-hearted Queenslanders. At the centre, they even allowed me to play the piano in public. A woefully inadequate rendition of Waltzing Matilda, it attracted a disproportionate social media response, disproportionate, that is, to the quality of the rendition. We send our best wishes to the Winton community as they rebuild. More generally, let this be clear, our vast drought-stricken West needs visitors, visitors spending money. I trust you will now excuse my indulging in a few final personal observations. You're thinking, here's the best bit. Everywhere on our travels, and here in Brisbane, we've been fortunate to meet many of our fellow Queenslanders, many thousands here at Government House at community and ceremonial events. For example, 4,000 came to our Christmas Lights event and 4,000 to Open Day on Queensland Day. Other Queenslanders we have sought out, arranging a busy program of visits for significant events and commemorations, and to meet those who are dedicated to assisting and supporting people in need. Our admiration for them all knows no bounds. One of the less obvious personal benefits of this role is that for the first time in many years, I can work from home. It is great for me not to have to drive 15 kilometres to visit my wife during the day. I simply walk upstairs from my study. I said, it is great for me. And what a home this is, inextricably linked to our state's history for the past 150 years. We are honoured to have been in residence when the most recent additions, expanding and enhancing equitable access to the house, were completed. They are a stunning complement to this otherwise distinguished edifice. And we are about to release... I'll come to family honesty in a moment. And we are about to release, not long, Sophie, about to release a second edition publication highlighting Fernberg's historical and heritage significance, updated to include the expansions and the estate grounds. We are also exceptionally fortunate in that our busy schedules are supported by a marvellous team of professionals here at Government House, at the Executive Council Secretariat, and in a number of government departments. And I know representatives of them are here tonight with us. That team, ladies and gentlemen, facilitates a remarkably diverse and busy, positive program. To illustrate for you the events of the last 7 days. Last Wednesday, a community visit here and the Clerk of the Parliament with bills for assent. Thursday, Executive Council, then a formal dinner promoting philanthropy. Friday, I opened the state titles of the remote-controlled dirt racing championship at Launton, where you won't be surprised to hear I displayed an abysmal lack of coordination. Then the Governor's dinner at one of our long-standing city clubs. Saturday, opening the 100th Mount Gravatt Agricultural Show, Then in the evening, Opera Queensland's marvellous production of Candide. Sunday, the remarkable Childers Festival, joining probably at least 40,000 fellow Queenslanders. And yesterday, another tour group here, and then Opera Australia's fabulous opening night performance of Anything Goes at QPAC. This morning, I presented awards at St Stephen's Cathedral at the launch of Catholic Education Week. Then tomorrow, we have the Cairns Indigenous Art Fair, followed by the Australian Festival of Chamber Music in Townsville. I am privileged to have reached a point in my career where, as I was promised by the official secretary early on, the occasions are invariably marked by happiness, pointing up something of a contrast. Kay and I are most indebted to the highly professional team here at Government House in particular for devising and implementing this appropriately intensive program of community interaction. Few know this, but the Government House team has subtle but irresistible ways of ensuring that I stick to my busy and complex schedule and of safeguarding the dignity of the office of Governor. Early in my term, with, I claim, the complicity of our security officers, I escaped alone one Sunday by foot up to Paddington, where I presented a script to the chemist. Out he came. "Aren't you the Governor-General?" I cleared up that misconception, only then to be admonished by him, "Don't you have people who do these things for you?" And then, cognizant of calories, I trudged down and then up the hills back to Fernburg. The official secretary, alerted in the meantime to my activity, politely asked me on the following Monday morning, please not to do that again. And when I am administrator, it becomes very difficult, as the people of the nearby St Thomas's Anglican Church at Toowong discovered to their intrigue one Sunday when they suddenly found themselves, Kay and I attending, with a number of others in an especially secure secular environment. And lest you think that this head-turning attention brings with it the temptations of hubris and the wrong kind of pride, I assure you that my family always stands ready to bring me to earth, as they have thankfully in Kay's case since our marriage in 1971, and in the children's case since Carolyn came along in 1974. And the family tradition continues. During a dinner here some months ago, I asked our then 8-year-old grandson, early on dubbed by Kay Alexander the Greatest, to read the inscription on an elegant, engraved silver water jug presented to the 17th Governor, Colonel Sir Henry Abel Smith, in 1959. It says, presented to His Excellency the Governor, Colonel Sir Henry Abel Smith, by Gatton Shire councillors and architect in commemoration of the opening of the Gatton Civic Centre on 7th March 1959. From memories of my youth, Sir Henry Abel Smith was undoubtedly one of our most affectionately regarded Queensland governors. Well, responding to the question, Alexander whimsically announced, straight-faced, that it read, "Do not take notice of anything said by Paul de Jersey." I had his mother's permission to relay that story. Despite that dissenting opinion, I hope my remarks this evening have been accepted in the spirit in which they are offered. Coming from me, this address has been of unprecedented length. That is, I assure you, I say reverting to type, a non-binding precedent from which I will most certainly depart. I hope your spirit tonight, ladies and gentlemen, has notwithstanding remained unbroken, like our constitutional framework following this year's election. Those events highlight that the touchstone of the governor's role remains constitutional, not as a mere constitutional bystander, but as a non-political decision maker applying constitutional principle in an independent manner. More generally, governors ought also to be purveyors of positivity. After a mere but privileged 12 months as your governor, having witnessed at first hand our state's abundance of talent, hard work, enthusiasm, and plain human decency, Kay's and my optimism about the future of Queensland, its institutions and its people is greater than ever. Thank you.